You know, God is big. I mean, God is really, really big. God is bigger and stronger and more powerful than anything we could imagine. I mean, you take the biggest, strongest, greatest, most powerful thing you can think of, take it times 10, and you're still nowhere close to how big and great and powerful and awesome God is. God is just so big and so vast and so everything, really, that you and I are really not capable of getting our minds around just how big God really is. And that's an awesome thing in a lot of ways. But there are some ways in which it's kind of a problem. And the reason I say that is because you and I worship God, or at least we try to the best of our ability. And to worship someone, you have to be able to understand them, at least to some extent. Because after all, how could we worship someone that we could not understand at all? Somebody who was totally arbitrary, that we had no knowledge of. How could we worship somebody like that? And so we try to understand God. And yet, in a lot of ways, we just cannot do it. God is just too big. God is just too much for us to really understand. And that's one of the things that we've run into as we've done this sermon series on the minor prophets called Who Are These Guys? And it's something we run into as we look at the prophet Zephaniah. Today we read two sections from Zephaniah. We read from the first chapter and we read from the last chapter. And the two readings just seem to say two completely opposite things. The first part of Zephaniah prophesies destruction. Destruction of pretty much everyone and pretty much everything. God says, I will sweep away both people and animals. I will sweep away the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea. I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all Jerusalem. Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. There's more of that sort of thing in Zephaniah. Later we read, the day of the Lord is bitter. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness. I will bring such distress on all people that they will grope about like those who are blind. Their blood will be poured out like dust. The whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. That's the first part of Zephaniah. Then later in the last part of Zephaniah, we read something entirely different. We read, sing, daughter Zion, shout aloud, Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away your punishment. The Lord, the King of Israel, is with you. Never again will you fear any harm. We also read, the Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. He will rejoice over you with singing. And as we read both of those things in the book of Zephaniah, we get confused, or at least I do. Because, Zephaniah is not a very long book. And as we read it, it seems like we go from God's going to wipe everyone out and there will be nothing left to rejoice because God's here to save you very, very quickly. It's basically just the turn of a page and we've got this entirely different message. And so that's why I say that God is too big for us to really understand or even try to describe. Because we've got both of these things going on. We try so hard to explain or describe God. We say all kinds of things to try to do it. We'll say things like, God is love. We say, God is peace. We say, God is fair. We say, God is just. We say, God is righteous. We say all of these things, so many things. And really, at first glance, these things seem to kind of contradict each other. And that can be a problem. Because we say God is love, but then we say, oh, really? Then how come God allows all these bad things to happen? We say God is just. Then we say, oh, really? Then how come God lets so many bad people do so well? We say God is fair. Then we say, oh, really? Then how come so many wonderful people are taken from us at young ages? And some of the worst people in the world seem like they lived for such a long time. From our perspective, these things are contradictions about God. I'm not saying they are contradictions, but it seems like it to us sometimes. Because there are just so many things that you and I don't understand. It's not that the things we say about God are untrue. They're all true. And there are a lot of other things that we could say about God that are true too. It seems like we take all of these things and we try to put them together and we try to look at what we have. And it seems like we're not even close to a picture of God that's even coherent, much less one that would really seem understandable to us. And that's where faith comes into it, of course, but even that, sometimes that seems like just kind of a pat, all-encompassing answer that really does not explain or satisfy us either. I mean, yes, faith is important, obviously, but faith in what? We get that we cannot completely understand God, but we feel like we need to get some kind of handle on who God is if we're going to worship God. So what do? And here's where I think that Zephaniah and these other minor prophets can be helpful to us. Because as we read Zephaniah, about 80% of the book is death and destruction and disaster and doom and desolation and probably some other D words that I could not think of. There are only 3-4 chapters in the book, but the whole first chapter is like that, and the whole second chapter is like that, and the start of the third chapter is like that. We go from chapter 1, verse 2, in which says God says, I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, to chapter 3, verse 8, in which God says the whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. The whole world. But that first 80% of the book, I don't think is the most important part of the book. It's important. I'm not saying it's not. But it's not the most important. Because then comes the last 20% of the book. Chapter 3, verses 9 through 20. Verse 9, God says, I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. And verse 20, God says, I will bring you home. I will give you honor and praise among all the peoples of the earth when I restore your fortunes before your very eyes. And everything in between verse 9 and verse 20 is similar to that. Now that comes nowhere close to a complete understanding of God either, but we're told that everything that's in the Bible is there for reasons. And I also think that things appear in the Bible in the order that they do for reasons. There are reasons why, after all this death and destruction and doom and disaster and desolation and all those other D words, these last 12 verses show up. I may not know all the reasons, but I'm pretty sure that I know one of them. God wants us to know that bad things are going to happen. In fact, there are some really bad things that are going to happen. And we're not going to be able to stop them at all. And God's not going to stop them either. Bad things are going to happen, period. Except that's not really right. Because it's not bad things are going to happen, period. It's bad things are going to happen, comma. And after that comma comes a but. Bad things are going to happen, comma, but the bad things are not going to last forever. That's why this last part is in the book of Zephaniah, I think. To make sure that we know that no matter how bad things get, there is still hope. Hope for you, hope for me, hope for the whole world. There is always hope. God never leaves us without hope. Because God is hope. God is all those other things we've talked about too, and God's a lot more than those things. But God is always hope. God is hope. God always has been hope. God always will be hope. We say where there's life, there's hope. You know why we say that? We say it because where there's God, there's hope. And where there's God, there's life. And so, where there's God, there is life. And where there is God, there is hope. There's always life and there's always hope. God never leaves us without hope. God will always be too big for us to understand. Maybe in heaven we get to understand it. I don't know. I suspect not. I suspect even in heaven we don't really understand. It's just that in heaven we experience God in such a direct way that we don't need to understand anymore. I don't know. But what I do know is that no matter what happens, God will be there and God will give us hope. Bad things will happen, but the bad things will not last forever. No matter how bad things get, there is still hope. There's hope for you. There's hope for me. There's hope for the world. Because whatever else God is always hope. Amen.